Lorraine Goodwin of the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco and Carolyn Royston from the Imperial War Museums in London. Welcome to everybody coming in. Please sit. Make yourselves comfortable. So, a couple of things about logistics first. I would ask that you hold your questions until the end after everybody's given their presentations, because we've allowed time for a bunch of question and answer, and I think the papers relate to each other in some ways, and so a question that you have during the first paper may get answered during the third or modified. So we'll do question, answer, and discussion at the end. And so I'm going to start us off by offering a definition as a starting point, because this panel was really driven by the idea of ways to use something called design research in developing products and services and programs in museums. And so the first question is, what is design research? And so I thought I'd start off by just offering a working definition, and that is, I'm going to break the rule about not reading your slides and read my slide. And it's research that's embedded in the design process, and this is really key, will produce actionable insights to create or evolve a product or service. This is not an official definition. This is I came up with it while doing the panel definition, but I think it's pretty close to what design research actually is. It's very practical in its orientation, and the key thing has to do with the actionable results. This is not a research or evaluation process that is for its own sake, or purely academic, or purely to advance the state of knowledge on a topic. It's designed to produce things that you can take action on. And so other things that we can say about design research are that it's qualitative, it's ethnographic, it's very user-centered in its orientation, and it really focuses on motivations and goals of visitors, of end users, of audiences. And so in that respect, while it may have some quantitative aspects to it, it's not purely analytical in its approach, and it's really concerned with human factors, if you will. And so the kinds of things that design research might include, but this is certainly not a definitive list: observation, audience and market research to understand your users and your audiences, product research to understand possible solutions or ways that you might approach things, and then usability research to understand the interaction between bullet 2 and bullet 3, that is, the interaction between your audiences and products and services. And I think one of the things that's notable about the presentations this morning is that they all use a real mix of methodologies to conduct design research. No one is using just one thing. They're all collecting data and doing research using a mix of things, and I think that provides a particularly rich set of results and a nuanced picture. But they're all using different techniques and methods. And I came across this quote from Jane Fulton Surrey, who is with the design firm IDEO, about design research. And I think it captures something about the process that I really like and find very powerful. And that is that it is both a driver for innovation and imagination, but it also is a way of doing data-driven decision-making. It's a process by which you can gather information and data that will produce insights that are evidence-based. And I think most of us would agree that these days when we're making decisions about things, an evidence base is more important than ever. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our case studies, because this panel is really two things. One, it's a presentation of 3 case studies at 3 different institutions and how they use design research to do different things. And it's also making a case for the use of design research as a method, as an approach for developing either new products and services or evolving existing ones. And I think we have kind of a continuum on our presentations here. Our first speaker, Charlotte, is going to talk about evolving an existing service at the National Gallery. Our second speaker, Lorraine, is going to talk about building a new tool with existing resources. And then our third speaker, Carolyn, is going to talk about using design research to imagine something completely new, beginning a process where you have no idea what the end product or service might actually look like. And so different applications of uses for design research. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Charlotte, and I'm going to start up another PowerPoint presentation for her. All right, it's all yours.
Thank you. I feel a little bit under pressure because I realise now, looking at my other panellists, I'm actually the only one you're going to be able to see above the computer. So, not to be heightist, but but that is true, in fact. So welcome. My name is Charlotte Sexton. I have recently left the National Gallery London, where I was head of digital media. And I needed to bring that in because really this case study looks at a very important piece of work that I undertook while I was there, and which will, I hope, go on to evolve and make use of the findings from this piece of research to take a service forward, a pre-existing service. So I wanted to really give you an example where I found it incredibly important and relevant to do some extensive research around a service that was very familiar to the organisation. And sometimes familiarity can lead you to perhaps stop taking something for granted or stop seeing the potential for it going forward. And I felt when I took over the audio guide service that actually this should and could be the foundation for a mobile interpretation at the gallery. But there were clearly opportunities to not only understand it better, but to realise how it might be developed going forward. And I think most importantly to appreciate that we didn't think the service was broken in any way, but clearly some fresh eyes and some evidence upon which to make some critical decisions going forward is going to be really important. And you have to remember that this is fitting into a much wider program of work which has a strategic strand to it. And of course, mobile is a big part of that. So before kind of rushing off to the new, I really wanted to think a little bit about something that was already in place. And I think that probably is a good moment to recognise our inherent temptations and the appeal of the new. You know, the next app, the next fancy pants thing, but to remind ourselves that actually sometimes something that's been with us for a while is actually incredibly valuable. And I love this picture, and I should give a shout out to Jana Hill. I snapped this surreptitiously when I was doing a behind the scenes tour at the Eamon Carter Museum in Fort Worth. And I just thought this is such a great image to encapsulate how I feel about audio guides and the benefit they have in terms of the engaging audiences during a visit. I don't think it's essential to have a pipe, but I don't know, maybe. So, you know, this is a very classic presentation of an audio guide. And of course, we forget, but they've been with us for absolutely donkey's years, since the 1950s, in fact. So this picture is taken in the early 1960s, and I think it does. I think it says a lot about how a portable guide can engage somebody with, in this case, a work of art. You know, they're clearly looking like they're enjoying themselves. They're able to share an experience together. And of course, it's portable, so they can take it around the museum during their visit. So I don't for a minute want to sort of disregard something because it's simply been with us for a while. And of course, I have to recognize that, you know, within this room, I'm sure we're from all sorts of different organizations, but an audio guide may be your only form of transportable interpretation. So, you know, they're incredibly important to us as institutions. And I really believe firmly that if they're well produced and well marketed, they play a really critical role in the visitor experience and help bolster both knowledge and enjoyment. So just to set a little bit of context, this is the National Gallery London. Has anyone had a chance to visit? Oh, okay. So some of you are familiar with it. If you haven't been, consider it a very traditional art museum. you would recognize it from other institutions around the world. So let me take you inside. So this is a foyer space, and I have to say National Gallery London is a major visitor attraction. It's one of the third most visited venues. It gets just shy of about 5 million people a year, so it's incredibly popular. And of these, you know, the numbers, the demographics shift through the year, but in the summertime, 60% of those people are coming from overseas, and a great number of those, English is not necessarily going to be their first language. And for a swathe of those visitors, it will be their first time at the gallery. So it's very much about orientating them and preparing them as they visit. So this image, although I've just said we get 5 million people a year, obviously this is deceptively empty. This image, I think, gives you a pretty good sense of both the space and the way the gallery approaches its display. So it's very traditional, but if you really look closely at that image, what you'll see is actually there's very little interpretation in the space, just the standard kind of label. So unless somebody is carrying something with them or they come pre-armed with knowledge and experience, there's actually not that much in the moment for them to draw on. And you've got to remember, this is a collection that's got incredible masterpieces, so there are things that people are inherently interested in. So one of the goals of the gallery was really to think very carefully about how it should use interpretation as a way of engaging the public to take a longer look. That was the most important thing. How to get people just to pause for a second to really become more familiar and more intimate with the objects we have. And how to do that in a way that might be offer some sort of unique visitor experience, something that would connect with people on a personal level. And you can see this kind of scale of the challenge here. I love this picture. This is a kind of classic shot which just shows you the complexity of trying to work with a diverse audience. So this group are obviously interested in Van Gogh's Sunflowers. But let's dissect it for a second, see what's going on here. See, this couple, they're actually not engaging with the painting, they're engaging with the label. This guy has a very intense view of the artwork, and that's primarily because he's using the audio guide. But of course, for some people, they're not interested in interpretation at all. This is a lean forward moment. This is a moment to commune with the art and to get as close to it as our security staff will let you. So, pre-existing service, where do you start? Where are we going to? What are we going to do with this? Well, obviously, you could decide to start from scratch, but I think it was really important for us, for a number of different reasons, to just pause and think about this existing service. And you know, it's a service that is really centered around the permanent collection, so it has real importance in the group of in the overall offer, basically. And one of the things I wanted to do with the research was to really get a better understanding of that service and how it might fit into the gallery's wider ambitions around mobile delivery. So the service itself, just to put it in some context, has actually been established since the mid-1990s, and it was done in partnership with Antenna Audio. And it's really the most comprehensive interpretation tool we have on offer for people as they come into the gallery spaces. So one of the most striking things to note is that for almost every picture on the main floor of the gallery, and you have to remember this is an organisation that only has 2,500 works of art. Well, 1,500 of those, 1,500, have audio guide stops. So it's a big chunk of the collection has some form of interpretation. It's a huge amount of content. And in addition to those 1,500 stops, we also have a highlights tour, which cherry picks out 40 of the most famous works, if you like. And those have been translated into 12 languages. So for many overseas visitors, like this one in the picture, The audio guide may be the only interpretation they have access to while they're in the gallery space itself. And alongside that material, there's also 3 family tours and 5 thematic trails. So it's actually a big offer considering the size of the collection itself. So the guide not only provides visitors with a way to access and engage with the collection during a visit, and here you see someone who's using the foreign language tool, but just taking a moment out as they orientate themselves and traverse the building. But there's a second strand to this, because alongside the interpretation, the other really important thing to say about the audio guide tour is it's a revenue stream. And I think everybody would recognize in these, tight financial times, actually having a way to generate some funding for the organization is really important. So in terms of the research itself, the goal was very much about developing an up-to-date evidence base from which we could really shape some key decisions that we needed to make going forward, and specifically around mobile interpretation. And here, this is a kind of snapshot of the kind of overarching goals for the project, and I'll kind of take these to pieces as I go through it. But very much about how is it performing? We have some expectations of that, but do we know in reality what's going on? Very much wanted to know more about the audience and their motivations. These are things that have been around for a while. Has the audience evolved? Have their tastes changed? And then finally, because we have so much pre-existing content, is it still fit for purpose? Does it still meet the needs? Is the tone and style right? Because if it's not, that would have been a really expensive exercise to change it. So in terms of the approach itself, we partnered with Frankly Green and Webb, and I think that was a very important decision because it gave some external view of the service, a neutral voice, if you like. And advocacy was also an important point of this research work for me in terms of talking about next steps with senior management. In terms of the range of things we did, the project itself went on for about 6 months or so, and it was it was a phased activity, and I think it needed to be because we were almost tweaking and designing the next phase based on the information we were getting from the previous one. So what we did, we had a very extensive survey, 602 participants, of both users and non-users, because of course the goal is, it's great for people already using it, but what about the other huge percentage of people? I mean, the take-up rate's about 5%. So if you think about 5 million people, that's an awful lot of people who are not benefiting from this. We did a lot of personal interviews, and I think doing surveys is one thing, but I think having somebody in conversation is a very different proposition. One thing I was very interested in, and I have not seen it used before, was at the gallery in particular, was customer journey mapping. So thinking about all of the touch points and the experiences that people come across as they engage with that service, whether it's from the website or somebody at the visitor information desk or the audio guide desk, or a friend recommending it, that whole journey. And that was great because we could involve staff from different areas. And then we looked in detail at the content and selected about 13 different pieces of content to test them out on the shop floor, as it were. So what did we learn? Well, I think this is an interesting one. It did a great job for sorting fact from prejudice. And that was both internal and external. And here's just a few of the kind of comments we had back. So this was very interesting, and a lot of the information we gained was very useful in toppling off some of those old ideas about what this service was. Have some graphs for you, but briefly, I won't dwell on them. This one is useful because it reconfirmed the fact that the service itself was not broken in any way. The satisfaction levels were really high for those that used it. 90%, over 90% said they would recommend it. But that said, once you started digging a bit deeper, that didn't mean to say there weren't some tweaks and things that we could do to improve it. The next was really about, I felt this was most important, about really the positive effect of the guide. Because at the end of the day, it made a huge difference to people's experience of the collection. And just to pull out a couple of things here, they said it helped them learn more about art. They felt that it helped them enjoy their visit more. And I think really encouragingly, thinking about our goals, they also said that it was a positive influence in encouraging them to spend more time with the art. So these are all positive things. If you just look at the top two elements here, their response and our goals were very much in alignment, and it was all about encouraging them to connect with the collection. A couple of surprises. These guides were never envisaged for expert users. I won't try and define that term too heavily, but let's assume people with an intellectual motivation. They were never targeted at that group. And yet when we tested the content with them, we found that the guides themselves aligned very heavily with their motivations, without any tweaks or adjustments. And it also encouraged them to improve their experience, encouraged them to come back. So these are really positive things. But we did not actively market to this audience. So very interesting from my perspective in terms of potential. The other slight surprise, I suppose, in the mix was that for the families that used the tour, they loved them. 100% satisfaction, incredibly engaged, transformed their visit. However, the numbers of users was a fraction of the potential audience. So this was a group that really needed to be, they're often planners, they use the website really heavily. This was a group that really needed more awareness of the service and more encouragement to use the service. Okay, and finally, I think it's really important to note that for non-users, they were not hostile to the service. They knew we had one, they weren't hostile to it, they just had no view of it at all, no perception of it. So they didn't really have any clue what that service was going to do for them. So instead of, when you think about messaging, instead of things like this is a 90-minute tour or a highlights tour or whatever, it meant that we had to talk about the benefits of the tour. We had to communicate about it in a different way for those people. In terms of testing the content, the biggest concern we had was a lot of the material was very old, dating from the mid-90s. Factually, it was right, but whether the tone and style was right, I had some concerns about. So we wanted to test it in terms of tone, style, and also how it chimed with the expectations of the visitors. And so, and of course, the other thing we were doing, which I think is really important, was to actually use an evaluation framework against which we could measure that content. And I think actually this was a piece of work in its own right, and I think really worthwhile doing, as it gave us a very strong framework. Okay, so in terms of the content itself, we tested 13 different stops from different tours, and including some interviews from our podcast content. We recruited people to come in and use it, a very diverse bunch. And participants were asked to listen to each of the stops and then respond in the moment to that stop. And finally, an exit interview was conducted. And what did we learn? Well, it was very evident when we interviewed foreign language visitors that they felt really shortchanged. They only had 40 stops. And as they walked through the gallery, they could see all these other English versions available. It definitely had an impact on their visit. They wanted more, basically. So there's clearly an opportunity to extend the amount of material for foreign language. In terms of the style of conversation, so whether it's a narrative, specialist conversation, or music and sound effects, you can see on the right-hand side, music and sound effects, that was very... you loved it or you hated it. But in terms of the other types of conversation, people were very open. They liked the variety. But what they did want was a certain clarity or enthusiasm in the voice. So annoyingly, no overall single approach stands out, but quality was really important. And when we talk about quality, that's really about the type of voice, the type of speaker, people understanding who is speaking and the context, ensuring that it's well recorded and lively. So in terms of conclusions from the research, I mean, it gave us a really strong footing going forward. The service was well loved, but clearly there were opportunities to engage more people with it. Had a hugely positive impact, so definitely worth the effort in doing that. Immediate opportunities to extend the reach through better marketing and targeting of audiences, and really focusing on strategic improvements, so really putting our energy where it counts instead of starting afresh. And then finally, in terms of the process, I would say provided us with much needed up-to-date information and insight into the service. It really was useful in helping to dispel some in-ground perceptions of it. That was very useful as a communication tool. It helped us no end in terms of clarifying the audiences for who these tours could reach and would be useful for. It certainly gave us some confidence in our editorial approach. Very important, I think, gave us a roadmap for development. And I think also, being an opportunist, it showed us where there's potential to grow and develop the service in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm just going to switch files now for our next speaker, Lorraine Goodwin from the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Bear with me while I open the next PowerPoint document. And we're off.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me behind this podium over here. At least you can hear me, right? So I'll be discussing the process that we went through to design the education portal at the Asian Art Museum. Now, this website is teacher-focused, so it's for a very specific group. And throughout the whole process, we really involved the teachers to try to build out the best tool possible for their purposes. And we used a mixture of different methods to do so. Just a little bit about us. The Asian Art Museum is located in San Francisco. We have one of the best collections of Asian art in the Western world, not to toot our horn, but we have over 15,000 artworks from across Asia, spanning from Southeast Asia to the Himalayas, China, Japan, and Korea. And what we started off with in terms of teacher resources was teacher-focused content such as lesson plans, artworks, contextual images, videos, and background information, but all of that information was in PDFs and in print form. It wasn't very accessible to teachers. We also had a website that was purely HTML, so these PDFs were kind of plopped on the website, and teachers could read them. You know, they're 100-page packets, so they just weren't accessible at all. And again, our print resources were only available to teachers that either came on site and purchased the packets or somehow found out through the grapevine that they could purchase the packet through us and we'd send it off to them. So that's kind of what we're starting off with. You can see here, a lot of our resources were really rich. We had, information on how to look at art, videos on how to conserve art, lots of great stuff. So the question, how do we make our resources accessible to and relevant to teachers? That's what we were sort of starting off with as our baseline. So what we did is in the design process, we started with hiring professional evaluators to kind of get a big picture of what really teachers wanted. So we did a traditional survey where we surveyed 420 participants and also conducted focus groups where we really honed in on some of the details. Those focus groups were broken up into different grade levels. So we had elementary, middle, and high school, and those met separately so we could really figure out what those different groups needed because they had very different needs in terms of the type of content that was most useful for them in the classroom. And so here's kind of a picture of our focus group here. And so with that larger baseline study, we found that, teachers wanted a means to find their resources on the web via a searchable means. They also, as many of you who are educators in the room have probably learned over the years, that they want resources that are easily modifiable. They don't want them just as is. And we found that they wanted these specific content categories, such as suggested activities, background information, comprehensive units, which is kind of interesting because they also said they wanted modifiable content that was sort of disparate, and detailed lesson plans, which is interesting. So with this information, the next steps that we took was to convene teacher advisory groups to review our pre-existing content. There was so much of it, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And so we had them take a look at the content and tell us what's the most relevant to their teaching in the classroom, and break that content up. And then, the content had been created over years, 10 years of content that was in these packets. We also had wonderful curatorial content, but it was written by our curators, so that needed to be modified for the classroom. So we hired teachers to help create new content and modify the pre-existing content. And from there, we inventoried our assets, just had a huge spreadsheet, very basic. And we hired a firm to build out this new searchable database. And again, our museum actually didn't have, everything was as static HTML pages on our entire website. So there's no real means except for sort of a basic Google search to find different types of resources, no way to filter these resources. So this is what we sought out to do. And then from there, we conducted user testing. So these teachers. So the first step in our user testing process was card sorting, so to see how teachers would group certain types of content, where they would look for that content, and what we should call certain content categories. We started out with the baseline content, such as background information activities, from the previous survey, and then saw how the teachers responded to those different content categories and how they would organize them, what made sense to them, that sort of thing. And interestingly, some of the content categories that were suggested in the survey, in the focus group, when we actually did the card sorting activity, we found that some things weren't the most intuitive. So we had things like resource set that were actually suggestions from the survey, but it didn't make sense, and we brought in some users. They didn't really understand what it was. There are other terms such as format as well, which we thought would be pretty self-explanatory. Like we were thinking of it as like videos, background information, that kind of thing. Didn't make sense to the teachers. Another thing that didn't make sense was, subject area, for example. They didn't understand really, they wanted academic subject. That made more sense. So things that you would think were intuitive were not quite. Maybe they're just intuitive to us as museum professionals, but we discovered that, and that's why we did this, is that they weren't. And so we started, that's how we started to build our website from there. So here's our first look at the website. You can see that we really took the users' information, the teachers' input into account by really putting the types of content on the site up in the front, in the forefront. We have the lessons, artworks, videos, background information, also a map for teachers to be able to select their resources that way. And so you can also see here they can explore, the resources. They can filter by topic, type, grade level. All of those categories are based on the user testing that we did with teachers. Okay. So from there, we conducted usability testing after the card sorting, where we actually had teachers look at the website and saw how they used it. So we gave participants a series of tasks. Many of you are probably familiar with usability testing, and observed them performing those tasks. And we also documented any challenges. So some findings, which was interesting, is that again, we found here that what teachers said in the survey, as well as in the focus groups, and even kind of in the card sorting activity, was quite different than how they actually behaved. And so, for example, on our site, we found that some aspects of the map function weren't intuitive. You'll see that there's a little area there that says, you can click on a region, and it's, for example, in China, and you have lessons, activities, artworks. Those little numbers next to them, right now, they're live links. At the time, the teachers actually, it was just you could click the button, the View Resources button at the bottom, and view all of the resources, but the teachers kept on clicking on the numbers, really wanting to get at the more granular information. So we built that out for the teachers based on the user testing. So here's more of the site. And so another thing that we found is that teachers need to see certain criteria associated with search results. So initially, our search results was basically just sort of like a Google search. So you had an image and then a title, but not much more. And teachers really wanted to see that information up front. So in this case, we put in the search results, you could see the grade level, the resource type, duration, that kind of thing, as well as the description, and that was all based on the testing that we did. Also, pages were too long. They couldn't find related resources, so we built out a more button, a less button, so they can find those things. So really, why should you care? Why does this matter? Well, I think, the big takeaway here is that we involved teachers in each step of the process and used a variety of methods. So we started off with a survey to get a big overall picture of, what teachers' needs were, and then we really honed in. So we had, the focus groups, and then went down to the card sorting and then the usability testing. So we really listened to the teachers at all steps of the process. We didn't just, leave it at the survey, put out, the background information, the artworks, and then let it be. And that really informed the build out of our site. We did a remedial evaluation of the site and found that it is used the way we thought it would be, which is exciting. And, almost 3/4 had used the materials directly with students in their classroom. And they're using it in a variety of ways. And the process continues. So, this website, it's very data heavy. It's lesson plans, activities, but, more and more teachers are wanting, interactives and, more engaging resources to use with their students besides just activities and lesson plans and that kind of thing. So, we are reconvening our teacher groups to create more content in the classroom, including interactives in our first webinar. And we have a summative evaluation of the site forthcoming. And that's about it. Okay.
Thank you. I really love the contrast between what people say and what they do when it comes to user testing. It's okay. Carolyn Royston from the Imperial War Museums.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to talk to you about looking at how we are creating a new digital product for IWM London and kind of where we've got to in that process. And but before I do that, I wanted to just give you some context so that you kind of understand a little bit about why we're embarking on this project. So this is IWM, our main flagship branch in London. Oops. It is, used to look like that inside. It's often been termed a teenage boy's fantasy bedroom. I'm not going to comment beyond that. Obviously, I can't say, but it is pretty awesome when you walk in, and kind of slightly chaotic, and but everybody. That's literally when you walk in. So it's pretty awesome, and then you can stand on the balcony and you can see all the objects, and you can get up close, and it's very fun. And we had a range of more interactive areas for children specifically. So this is a submarine experience. I'm just going to call everything an experience. This is the Blitz experience. So you could go into this thing, which was slightly weird, and experience the Blitz during wartime London, and then walk out onto a street and imagine that that's what it's like. We had a 1940s house built in on the lower ground floor of the museum, which was incredibly popular with visitors. And that's basically what you could do, but for some reason it was incredibly popular. And we had a trench experience, so you could walk through a World War I trench with bombs going off and screaming, and it was it was. Because you must come to the museum, and there you go, and some mannequin type World War I soldiers. And you could go into Anderson shelters. So while you were being bombed, you can go into these shelters which families did during the war. And the reason I'm showing you all of these things, there's lots of other stuff in the museum, obviously, but this was really the kind of family children offer that we had in our museum. And then this happened on purpose, not. But we closed. We closed at the beginning of this year for a major refurbishment. And the reason being that next year, in 2014, it's the centenary of the First World War. The museum was founded during that time. And we are opening a brand new First World War gallery, World War I gallery, I should say, sorry for Americans, World War I gallery, and the whole of the atrium, so that those first pictures that I showed you is going to be completely revamped. And it's going to look something like this. So still the large objects. There's going to be kind of clusters, so themes of objects around the building, and it's going to be very different. What this means, though, so the museum is sort of partially reopened in the summer, but it's going to fully reopen in June of next year. And what the offer is going to be in June of next year is we're going to have these new galleries, the new atrium space with large objects, some new objects that haven't been displayed before, and some of the old favorites, and themed clusters. We're going to have our art galleries, we're going to have our Holocaust exhibition, we're going to have a family and wartime exhibition. We have medals for bravery, a gallery of that, some new cafes and some new shops. But what won't be there anymore is the things that I showed you, the Blitz experience, the trench experience, no submarine exhibition, no 1940s house. So I'm really sorry if you never got a chance to see them. They were awesome, but that's your loss. But what we will have as our main family offer is the Family in Wartime exhibition, okay? So it's going to be quite a different experience when you visit next year. So what we know is that we're going to have a huge amount of multimedia and interaction in our new First World War I galleries. We're going to be introducing some digital labels around the museum and in the atrium space to help with interpretation. But what we know around that is that interpretation of our objects is not always easy. And there's two real reasons for that. One is virtually every single thing in our museum is out of context. If you're looking at a tank, or you're looking at a plane, or you're looking at a gun, it's not in situ. So we have to bring this to life in some way for our visitors so that they can really understand the impact of conflict. We're not a military museum, we're a social history museum. So it's really understanding about the impact of conflict. And the second thing is being able to tell the stories behind those objects, because they are amazing and very relatable. Most people that come into the museum will have some kind of personal, emotional connection. And this is particularly true for families. So often you'll have, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, or someone who's serving in the armed forces who'll be coming into the museum and have some relationship. And we have no more of those family favorites when we open. So we have a very limited offer for families. So this got us thinking around what this might look like, because we know there's still plenty to work with. So, you know, we're going to have this new incredible space. We still have all the amazing stories. We all have the amazing objects, and there's loads and loads to discover. So we really wanted to think about what we could do to support some of the audiences that we're not going to feel that we're not going to be serving as well. And we work with Frankly Green and Webb as well. And we asked them to carry out some audience research before we closed last December. And we wanted them to really focus on the question of what a mobile experience might be when we reopen in June next year, and to try to help us to identify the key audiences that we need to cater for. So they came back to us, they did some really great work, and they came back to us with this model, which was very helpful for us to think about. So these kind of three areas of mission, delivery, and audience, and then those kind of intersecting bits in the middle. And that was really about looking at the mission. So, you know, what are we trying to do here? What are our objectives for our projects? What would success look like? And who should be involved in the museum to help us to make this project? And who will be impacted by whatever it is that we produce? So it was very much, you know, they'd done a bit of outward-facing work through the research, but then really starting to focus on making a product and what that would mean for our organization. In terms of audience, who is that audience, and what do they want to do at our site, and what do we want to encourage them to do, and things they're not doing now, and what do we want to stop, so to make their experience better. And in terms of the delivery, you know, what's the physical context? I talked about the objects, and how might visitors interact with any mobile experience? And all of those kind of questions in the middle there. And so they came back with some recommendations for us. One was identifying that we really weren't in this new museum, certainly in the first instance, because this is a part of a 10-year building phase, but certainly in the first instance, we need to support learning families. And that means, you know, informal leisure learning around some of the key topics in the museum, such as World War I and family history. We need to help audiences to identify and access narrative threads and key objects, and to support and enhance a whole family interaction. So getting away from that, you know, putting a headset on, not having a social experience. And also to help parents, because we know that we have a lot of parents, because our subject matter is very challenging and difficult, that parents struggle to be able to explain that to their kids, and often also don't feel they have adequate knowledge to be able to explain things properly. I mean, I once watched a father try to explain the intricacies of D-Day to his 4-year-old son using salt and pepper shakers. I don't so you know, it's tough. So what next? So we had this great research and this feedback, and it gave us some key questions. Should we create a digital property aimed at families? And if so, what should it be? Can we go beyond the traditional guide, multimedia tour, and create a different experience? Is it digital? Is it commercial? So we had some very clear questions. And we had some aspirations. We wanted this project to be cross-departmental, recognizing that there was, you know, a complex stakeholder needs involved. We wanted the project to be led by digital media. We wanted to try and develop a shared understanding for the project across the team and make a product that would work for everybody. And so that was really critical, involving, you know, visitor services, our commercial teams right from the start in the product development. And we wanted a clarity of vision across the team so that would secure buy-in throughout the organization. And we followed a process. So we worked with Frankly Green and Webb, and we also then introduced a company called Coney, who are interactive theatre makers with a gaming element to them, which we thought would be really fun and interesting and open our minds to what might be possible. And we had 5 half-day workshops, involved a briefing session, some reconnaissance, some visits and interviews, participation design lab and a creative lab, and it was very collaborative. And we did lots of activities in these sessions. So they interviewed each of the team members to work out what their superpowers were and what their skills were and what they could contribute to the project. We did some participation design with Post-its. Out of that, we created a manifesto for this project, and we were really clear about that this manifesto would be open-ended and evolve as we did more product development. We went and did some observation in the museum, and we looked at what kids and families were doing and was very surprised about the things that we saw. And then we had a creative lab, and we spent half a day trying to think up, out of all the things that we'd learned from the workshop, what a product might be. And so some of us did some paper kind of thinking. One pair went off into the museum and did a little iPad, made a little iPad thing, and with Photoshop, and photoshopped themselves in a photograph and thought about, well, is that something we could do? And what was interesting about that was it really brought the whole idea of the product to life in a very, this was done literally in 20 minutes, and had the museum been properly open, we would have gone out and prototyped that right there and then, just to get some really quick feedback. And it was great because for the people who are not digital in the project team, it really gave them some insight into how Agile might work and how quickly and how much you can learn in a very short space of time. So there was a real value in the process that we brought together a whole range of expertise. We kind of got some sense as a group of what our stakeholder needs were, and really interesting things from visitor services around the operational, the practical side of things. We created this manifesto. We actually had a consensus about the next steps for this project, and also developed some trust in the process, because at the beginning everyone was really nervous. Oh, we're working with a theatre interactive. I don't know what that means, and I'm really scared about these workshops. So at the end of it, they really felt like they'd been in a process and that they'd worked together. We were left with some questions. What is the content? We were still sort of struggling with what it might look like. Is there a business model here? What's the non-monetary value of this product? How are we going to measure and evaluate it? And how is the operational side of it going to be resourced? So these were all open-ended questions that we left on the table still to be discovered. And so the outcomes for my department and for my team in terms of leading on this project was we really wanted to be able to develop this in-house and to have control of the development of the project, and therefore allow it to be iterative, allow it to grow, allow it to be informed by the way visitors are using it. We committed to using Agile project management, prototype, test, iterate. We wanted to evolve the solution rather than decide from the start this is what it's going to be. Some people had some preconceived notions. We only asked for a modest budget because we knew we were going to work in this way, and therefore we didn't need to say to the organization, we need hundreds and thousands of dollars in order to be able to do anything. We're going to try and launch this with a minimum viable product and see how it goes. We've involved stakeholders throughout. We want to involve families throughout. That's our audience. And really critically for me, as a way of working, to quietly drive organizational change through this product development model. And so our next steps, we interestingly decided at the end of this process that we couldn't go any further right now, that we really, really needed to wait until the museum reopened so that we can better see how the new spaces are being used. No point wasting time in designing something when we ourselves don't know what we're going to be asked, how people are going to respond, what they're going to be looking for. So we'll reassemble the project team when we reopen in June next year. We will do some very rapid prototyping, testing, iterating with live audiences, and we've kind of said that from July to September of next year, that's what we're going to do. And come out with something in the fall next year that actually will be something we'll put out onto the floor. We'll also develop a non-digital prototype idea so that we can actually see, is this really a digital product? Because I'm very, very happy to say, if this works better with a pencil and a piece of paper, we should do that. We're going to manage the expectations. We're going to keep saying that we're launching with a minimum viable product. And we'll just keep going with the ongoing advocacy around what this product might be and where it goes next. And that's as far as we've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we decided that after the presentations, we deliberately kept them a little bit on the short side because we wanted first to have plenty of time for you all to ask questions of the panel, but I also wanted to put some questions to them myself for the purposes of a little bit of a roundtable conversation, because I think there are, obviously these are very different kinds of projects, but there are some common threads, and I think that those can be useful and perhaps more easily teased out in conversation than in using slides. So are the mics on the table on? And if not, how do we turn them on? Okay.
Is this working? Yep.
Okay, super. So the first question that I want to pose to the three of you is the research efforts and the processes that you went through in terms of the design efforts, were they different from previous similar efforts for the institution? Had your institution done anything like this before? If these efforts were different, how? And what was the impact of that? Charlotte, I'm going to put you on the spot to talk first.
The gallery had a long track record of doing evaluation, but I do wonder sometimes whether the evaluation actually then led on to anything, or whether it was almost a marker to close down a particular activity. I think what was different about this exercise is I had a very concrete, I didn't know what the end result would be, but I knew I had some very specific challenges I needed to solve. And so where I thought the process was really interesting was we evolved it as we went. I mean, working with you guys, you know, there was definitely a framework, but there were some elements of that of the research which was only designed once we had that initial piece of work back. And I thought that was quite a creative process, and it meant that you kind of evolved the whole thing as you went through it, but with a very clear understanding of where you wanted to get to at the end, and whether those core questions were answered. You know, that was really important. Mm-hmm. And it did the job for me because you know, it gave me a very clear understanding of how to tackle that service and how to really embrace it and develop it for the future.
Lorraine, was this new for the Asian?
Yeah, so this was completely new for the Asian. We actually don't have a digital media team. And so this is our first time embarking on user testing, on designing this type of product. So this is definitely something that will inform the future build-out of, you know, specifically for this website, interactives, our webinars, and also for the institution as a whole moving forward, really involving the users in the design process.
We've worked. I mean, we certainly worked cross-departmentally on many digital projects now. This kind of research we'd never done before, and as I said, people were very nervous about it, and nervous that it was so open-ended. They couldn't kind of put a whole, it'll start and finish. I know exactly how much resource I'm going to need, how much time this is going to take. So it was, but by the end of it, they did feel more comfortable with the process, and they could see the value, and that going out into the museum and watching people, observing, and we all did that as a sort of exercise, was really fascinating, because I think, you know, a bit like Charlotte, there were preconceived notions about the way that families interact with our stuff, and actually it was very, very surprising. So I would highly recommend it.
And that segues really nicely into my next question, which is, to what extent were assumptions challenged or conventional wisdom about things overturned as a result of doing this kind of work?
Well, we had previously, before we closed, had a multimedia guide, a traditional one with a vendor, and it was predated my time, but it never had a proper owner. It never really got updated. It was very, very poor. It was poorly marketed. The whole thing was, I think, the opposite to Charlotte's experience at the National Gallery. And so I think the idea that actually we could create something that we were proud of, that we had control over, that was really stamped with an IWM brand through and through, and that we could evolve and change, was enlightening for people.
And for us, there are certain conventions, to get granular, on the website, that we had preconceived notions about. So simple things like teachers didn't know the convention, or the teachers that we studied didn't know the convention of clicking on, maybe the logo to get home. Things like that, where it's, thinking, oh, that's self-explanatory. No, things like, so we had to build out, little home, links so they can get back home, or again, like the map, certain features on the map. So really, those types of conventions were really overturned by the results.
I think my piece of research was all about overcoming preconceptions, actually, both internal and external. And I think that was one of its greatest successes, actually, as a communication tool, to articulate that back and reflect that back to the organisation, especially around who is the audience. That was really interesting. As I said, this notion of intellectually motivated visitors, these experts, we would never have thought in a million years that the type of guides that we were providing would be applicable to them. And they actually constitute quite a high percentage of the audience. But we weren't aware. We had not tested it from that perspective, and we clearly weren't telling them about it. So I think it was hugely useful for that, and I'm a big believer in testing assumptions in a number of different ways. I mean, my background is design and in interaction design, and this idea of, do people know to click on the home button? I've sat through many a user testing with sort of designers shouting at the screen, "They're so stupid," and it's like, well, no, they're not, clearly. And I think this is the challenge where, unlike Carolyn developing something from the ground up, I think there is a real challenge in reinvigorating a pre-existing service. And I think, but I was also very conscious I was stewarding that service, and I didn't want to break it. I wanted to enhance it, and because money and resource is tight, I wanted to be really focused about where the effort went, because it's one of the few things in that organisation which crosses over departments. So to fix it or to tweak it would have required buy-in from people from lots of different areas. And it's about service provision, it's about marketing, it's about upselling, it's about creating new experiences, and the research was a great catalyst to bring all those people together and kind of focus them on it.
I think that that's one of the notable connections between your project and Carolyn's, even though on the face of it they're very different efforts. They were both cross-departmental efforts, and I think more successful for it.
Oh, yeah.
Having people together at the table who, I think, particularly in the case of the IWM, wouldn't necessarily all be sitting down at the table together to talk about a project in this way, was new. And so as far as that goes, do you think that there were any knock-on effects with the rest of the organization? Carolyn, you mentioned at the end of your presentation about one of your goals in terms of driving organizational change.
Yeah. So part of what we're really working hard on and you can hear more about that in our afternoon session, plug, is...
I really recommend.
Yeah, is digital transformation in our organization.
Yeah.
And part of what we're doing is introducing agile project management across all of the projects that we're doing. So not just around software development, but also around projects in which there is a digital element where we're working with other teams. And so, again, this idea of minimum viable product, evolving it, let's see how our users are doing it, prototype, test, iterate. These are new forms of working for the museum. And so this project was extremely helpful in illustrating how it might be possible to do that. And even that little example I gave you with the iPad, you know, that really had an impact for people, because they were like, wow, you did that in 10 minutes. And we could go out and test that. So I think it's, and at no point did I say, and everybody, we're going to be working in an agile way. I never mentioned it, but this is what so this is what I mean about the quiet change, and the expectation of, okay, well, this is how projects are going to be run now if there's a digital aspect to them.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we have around digital is the edges aren't as crisp as they used to be. And so ownership of projects and impact of projects now are very messy. They spill over the boundaries of pre-existing departments, roles and responsibilities, and remits, basically. It's a very disrespectful medium in that respect. And so for people stewarding these projects, I mean, there is a degree of finesse that needs to be put into play, because you have to interrelate with other teams, and it's going to have an impact. And so using these incremental developments, using research, using that sort of positive messaging about the benefit of the end product by that collaboration, hugely important, and absolutely what's going to happen from here on in.
So that's the list of my questions, and we have about 20 minutes left. I'm wondering if people in the room have questions too. Erica?
I just wanted to hear from each of the panelists a little bit more about the resources involved in your evaluations. It seems like there's a range as far as engaging consultancies, as far as using in-house staff, and could speak a little bit about your process, because I think that resources and allocation of resources is one of the things that's often a hindrance for doing effective evaluation, both in terms of budget and staff time. So it'd be great to just hear more about it.
So I can speak to, for the initial survey, we did hire outside evaluators. We had a grant to do so. So that's really what sort of sparked the project or sparked hiring those evaluators is that grant funding. But in terms of the card sorting and the other user testing, we did that all in-house. Very simply, we brought in the teachers. We did pay some of the teachers to come in to kind of give an extra little incentive, maybe like $50 teacher, which they thought was extremely generous, and we're so just excited to be involved in the project, which was wonderful. But we did use grant funds for, of course, the evaluators, and then of course the build out of the site, because we don't have any digital developers in-house. It was really me in the education department leading the project. Later on in the process, we did hire a web and digital manager, but she came sort of midway through, and she did help with the user testing.
I think my piece of research benefited because it fitted into a wider strategic plan, which meant I could budget in advance of it, which was really, really useful. So I actually had a budget allocation put aside for that, because I knew we didn't have the skills or the resource to do it internally, frankly. And also from a political point of view, it was incredibly useful to have an external, neutral organisation taking that on. We did also, because of course we've been accumulating lots of sales data on the guides through the service provider for donkey's years, we'd never really probed that very closely other than looking at the bottom line. And that was very interesting because, you know, everybody's got their sacred cow, and, you know, we felt these themed tours were fabulous. When you looked at the numbers, you could have killed all of them and you wouldn't have made a, you know, you would have actually made the job easier because the communication would have been simpler. So there was lots of different strands to it. We did it in a couple of phases. We tackled the content separately. We did the general research first, and I asked the service provider to do the analytics on the sales data and represent that back to. So there was an element of business modeling, an element of historic mining of data we already had, and then a phase of new research. And of course, all of that fitted into wider research the gallery had already been doing into its audiences and into the experience of the visit, of which the audio guide is a tiny little element. So these things are very interconnected, but it's only when you line all those ducks up you start to get a very interesting wider picture, which we never would have come to had we have not engaged in that.
Very briefly, I mean, because we knew we wanted to look at this as a project, we had put some budget aside to work with a consultant, and like Charlotte, we really valued the idea of having an external person come in and just provide that expertise and that independent kind of thinking. We weren't attached to anything that we already had that was pre-existing. And then it's, you know, our plan going forward is to use an in-house team totally to do this, to make it a key project, and to ensure that those people involved have the project as part of their program of work.
So is there room for questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Let's see. Thank you for the presentations. It was really interesting to see how you listen to the audience, what questions you ask, and what does that tell you about, you know, how to improve. Now, all of you talked about very specific sort of moments for a program or a remodeling or, you know, one time. And did you or are you considering taking some of these evaluations into a more sort of ongoing evaluation process, or was that sort of like a, you know, like a one-time thing?
I mean, definitely for us, I mean, that will be built into the way that we design the project. And because we want to keep evolving it, it's going to completely involve our audiences in the way that it develops.
Yes, and for us as well, we now have a teacher advisory group that will help us inform the build out of the next web feature that we sort of unveil. So we're keeping them in the loop, keeping them involved, and we're constantly reviewing and creating new content, and we're collaborating with those teachers to create that content.
And just a note about the institutional website at the Asian, right? That's an ongoing testing and evaluation process too.
Yeah. So the process that we used to build out this specific website, we have used it to build out our new website, to unveil our new shiny new website for the museum institution as a whole. That funding came after the funding for our education portal. That's why they happen separately. But that whole website was designed with this type of model, with user testing, but with a broader group.
I guess I'm in a funny situation, really, because had I have stayed at the National Gallery, then my answer would be absolutely. This would be the bedrock on which we build. But of course, I've recently left. So I think the best I could say is I think I did a good job in terms of engaging the audience with this issue, with the institution with this issue. I've certainly left them with some very valuable baseline information to build on, and I think this is not a service that's going to go away, so I think they would be foolish to ignore that. It's certainly given them a very clear direction to go forward on. But yes, I mean, broadly speaking, I think I think we did have a kind of spike of activity because I had budget, and this was a kind of catch-up piece of work, if you like. But I would say good practice is a rolling program. And that specifically, if you have some very clear questions you need to answer. I have no problem with Carolyn's idea of kind of doing incremental development and tweaking around that. And I think those long-standing services need that from time to time.
I'll just add as well that it's I think it's a pretty tough gig actually to try and secure budget for this on all the time, because it's not very sexy, you know, and it's quite a difficult one for, say, your manager to understand why you need to keep doing this. They've done, well, you did it, you know, why do you need to do it again? Why are we spending money on this? So it's quite a tough one, and I think you have to really dig in and you know, be able to explain the value in terms of improving your product.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of pitched it as an invest to save, to be honest.
Yes.
For the National Gallery and the Audio Guides project, I'm wondering if any of your research, well, first of all, I don't know if you have docents or interpreters in the gallery. Okay, so probably your research can touch on that. But I'm wondering then, more broadly, how would you approach research around the human interactive part of a gallery experience or any kind of museum experience? In particular, how would you use research to improve the interpretation that a person does inside a gallery or as part of an education program? Because that seems more touchy than an audio guide.
Yeah, we did, there were two really important pieces of work that was done over the last few years, and I thought they were just fascinating. One was a journey mapping exercise into the space, where they were literally observing people as they traversed the building, and it was so interesting. Literally, and they would map the building, and they would say, well, they came in this door, their eye was drawn to that painting in the top, in fact, they're right-handed, it was drawn to the painting in the top right-hand corner, and the most famous work is behind the door. Just, you know, and the information panel, you know, was in the wrong place, and just fascinating. So you could have redesigned the building on the basis of people's flow through it, and a lot of it was very common sense, but you don't see these things, you don't think of these things. I mean, so that was a very interesting one. And the other one that I thought was deeply valuable was one looking at visitor motivations and segmenting the audience and really understanding who these people were and why they were there, and then mapping back against those motivations. Those two I found really significant. And I think they were the building blocks for all sorts of new approaches and small tweaks as well that would have improved the experience overall.
I think that with this kind of more ethnographic approach, it matters less what exactly you're researching and more about how you're going about it. And so I think the kind of process that Charlotte just described with journey mapping and also looking at audience motivations and segmentation, that is, and also looking related to the journeys, really end to end at all aspects of a particular service or a particular experience. Within the context of that kind of work, let's say a site with significant docent tours or other kinds of programmatic or human interaction pieces could be wrapped into that very nicely. I think that conversations within an institution about issues involving, let's say, docents can be complicated political issues. But in some ways, then, even more reason to do a kind of broad ethnographic study to map people's experiences with the institution, and then let's say the docent interaction is one piece of a larger picture that perhaps makes it easier to have that conversation. Yes, hi, John.
A question for Carolyn. You had mentioned
They'll be fine with it.
Gonna have to be.
They don't really know that much about it at the moment, but they'll be fine when they see it on the floor and we're selling it. Yeah. What was the first bit? I was consumed with that last bit.
There's something that we had thought about originally as digital, which actually might make more sense physically.
I see.
I'd love to hear the example.
Well, I think because we just don't know what the space is going to be like, it's really hard to kind of see what people want and to be able to test out some of those things to see if they work with families. And I mean, what we do now at the moment, or what we did before we closed, was, we often we had like a paper trail for some exhibits, or we had some very specific family type of activities at the weekend that they could do, and they work really well. They're popular. So it might be that actually that is the best way to deal with the material in our museum, and we should just look at how we can improve on that, or really look at whether technology can enhance the experience in some way and broaden the content and bring it to life in a different way. And I think that's why it still has to be on the table. And why, I'm more than happy that if that actually turns out, the families are like, it doesn't work, my kid's fighting over the tablet, and actually I want something they can take home with them, from the museum. We're never going to check our emails and look at what they've collected around the museum, all of these things that you think that, the tablet experience might be able to enhance, then we're not going to go ahead and invest in that as a product.
Yes.
It's not a question, it's a contribution maybe, because I'm new to MCN and I realize that at the moment, new technologies bring actually a new way of thinking, and there may be a book that some of you would be interested into looking at on Amazon, which is called Service Design Thinking.
Oh yeah.
And it's an incredible tool because even before you have to go to a service outside, at least familiarizing yourself with what is this about, how is it done, with whom, could help maybe gather the right arguments to bring it along, because the outside look is also very helpful. But how do you bring that outside? That's one of the questions that comes around, right? So anyways, it's just
Thank you. Yeah, service design thinking. And it's very true that thinking about this from the perspective of service design rather than a single technology project,
Yeah,
digital
absolutely.
initiative, it is, as Charlotte has implied, much wider than that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, Carolyn was saying about, is it digital at all? And actually that's something I learnt through administrating and developing the audio guide service. It could be about customer service,
Marketing.
marketing. It may not be about the digital thing itself at all. So that was a real eye-opener for me, I think.
Yeah.
Could Caroline please describe a little bit more the digital labeling? What is the method of delivery and what type of information do you have on the digital labeling?
Well, we're still developing that. It's a new product that we're building in-house ourselves. We're taking pretty much the same approach that we are with this product, which is we will put out something that is, again, minimum viable product, something good enough to put out on the floor, but with the expectation that it will change and evolve as we see users interact with them. They're going to be in that big atrium space around the large objects, as well as the clusters, the themed clusters. And the idea is that there'll be a way for us to present multiple stories around the object, so rather than just a fixed label, and to be able to, for people to see the objects in their context, and to use our really, really rich and broad archive of sound and film, as well as photos. So it's another really, it's a really, really interesting project for us, and we'll be will be interesting to see how that evolves.
So those will roll out in June of next year?
There'll be a rollout in June of next year. There'll be some in the new First World War galleries. And interestingly for those, it's the opposite to the big atrium space. They're going to be focused on small objects, almost objects that you wouldn't notice but are very, very important and have amazing stories around them. So the labels are going to help with that interpretation. And then in the atrium space, yeah, they'll be there to help.
You had a question?
I was wondering if any of you, I think some of you touched on it here in the center of bilingualism in North America. Have you looked at like bi-technologicalism? How do you figure out if a visitor or visitor segment is not interested in whiz-bang stuff? They'd rather have paper, or they'd rather have a live person. How institutionally is that something people are grappling with at a strategic level, or is a lot of the digital stuff still kind of viewed as testing and experimental, given that with mobile we're really only 7 or 8 years into having devices commonly coming in with visitors? I'm just curious what your big picture looked like before you started on these projects.
Well, I think for us, it's viewed favourably, mainly because, as I said, it's quite a challenging experience. And so I think the idea that technology could help to tell these stories and to make the objects more accessible and to provide that context, I think is, but I think it's how you do it. And there are bad ways of doing it, and there are better ways of doing it. And I think that's really what we want to test out. But also to see, whether, as you say, this is something that, do people want to walk around with in a family situation with a tablet, or it might be more than one. We don't know.
I think the key to your observation is about audience segmentation, and that is we need to be careful that we don't make assumptions that what works for one segment or what we personally find appealing will work for all of our audience segments.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
about the mix.
it is, and to be, I think, comfortable with the idea that there is going to be a real range of what is successful with different audience segments.
Yeah.
And that's appropriate. That's not a failing.
Yeah, I think also one of my really strongest feelings about all of this is you start with the purpose, not, we need an app.
That's right.
It's like, what do we want people to do and
That's
feel
right.
and think
Yeah.
and experience?
Yeah.
And that process may lead you to lots of different things.
Yeah.
But if the beginning of the conversation is, I need an app, then you're pretty doomed before you've done anything, aren't you?
Yeah, and we've actually, I didn't mention it at all, but we got really focused in our workshops around this is a family with a child or children between 7 and 11. So, and the idea being, it comes back to evolving this, that if this works, well then let's look at another audience segment, and see whether we can build features and functions for that audience that may be different, but based on the same kind of approach.
Yeah.
So for us, we are focusing mainly on teachers, but within that teacher demographic, there's, teachers use materials in different ways, and we found that the website was the best way to get the content to people across the country rather than sending them these huge binders or, just putting PDF online. But with that said, we discovered, for example, that teachers do like to print things out, so we have like Word documents on there that they can print out and modify and then use that way. So it's digital, but then it kind of transfers to the paper that way. And same thing with printable PDFs of images that they can use in the classroom, things like that.
I think we're at time. If people have other burning questions, I think we'll be up here for a few minutes. And thank you all very, very much.